Do you worry about moving the wrong tenant into your rental property? You may be worried about attracting enough interest to your home or apartment. How do you get your phone to blow up? Once you start getting texts, emails, phone, voicemail messages, then you have to sift through them all and figure out who do you want to meet at the property and even see it. Now, all this time and energy goes out the window if you end up at the end of the day picking the wrong tenant that can't afford to pay your rent every month and refuses to follow the rules that you set out to treat your property right. So in today's video, I'm going to share a conversation that I had with my leasing manager, Samira Kiett, and we're going to talk about some of the recommended criteria that we found success in finding the most qualified applicants for the properties that we manage. And this should help you get more insight about how to turn that income in the spreadsheet when you originally bought the property into actual money in your bank account. So before we get started, I want to introduce you all to the Real Estate Wisdom channel. If this is your first time here, I'm Veronica Woods. And on this channel, I like to share tips about how to maintain and build and continue to build a profitable rental property portfolio. I also go over a lot of market updates of real estate in the Philadelphia County and the suburban Delaware County areas. So if you have a suggestion for a future topic, question about an insight you learned from this video, all my contact information is below. Be glad to kind of reach out and start a conversation with you. But now let's jump into part one of the conversation on rental property, rental criteria for the most qualified tenants. Part of a consistent screening process is having consistent criteria. So we thought we would go over kind of our top 5 criteria that we use when evaluating all tenants, and we think that more landlords should use if they want to attract and select a high quality tenant. So in no certain order, the first criteria that we'll cover is ability to follow directions. So, Samira, do you want to kind of start off by your thoughts on what it's like when a tenant applicant follows directions, or kind of what we can tell if they don't follow directions, even more important?
Yeah, so I mean, definitely this is something that I look at as when we receive a lot of applications for our properties and as we kind of go through that whole screening process, is like Veronica mentioned, that key point of following directions. Now, directions aren't like what we applied, what we expect, our standards and expectations. To be clear, directions are like what's spelled out. Like, please have 3 copies of your most recent pay stubs, enter in references, look for updates in your email, things like that, or, directions that we have listed for all of our applicants. And for those that follow it, complete their applications fully, attach the required documents, provide the required information, it makes the application process that much easier. Not only on us as landlords and property managers that's reviewing these applications, but also for the tenants as well. We can get back to them with a faster response. It's not a lot of back and forth, not a lot of follow-ups. And also, too, for our processes, it's very important. Like, we can't say, oh, this applicant only provided us with 1 pay stub, but this applicant gave us all 3. And like, we just want to make it fair and consistent across the board. And that's one way to make sure you're doing it consistently. But also, that's a really good telltale sign that they're following directions just to get their application in and, obey all of the rules needed for whatever process you have. It'll translate to how they communicate, how they listen, how they follow directions when it comes to maintenance requests in the house, when it comes to the process of how that's done and how they're going to work with you as a tenant if you have your own processes as a landlord or property management company.
Yeah, I mean, you really following directions just kind of shows like how easy is the person to work with, because you never know until people get in this situation how they're going to act. And we talked about in other videos where we do an interview and they say what they're going to do, but showing is also always better than telling. And so if they're argumentative or complaining about the process just going through the application, what do you think is going to be like when there's some issue that comes up in the home? They're going to be that same person. And it's not really tied to being tech savvy, because a lot of people may think in today's environment in 2024, when we're recording this video, most of the applications processes are online. And so there is a slight disadvantage for those who aren't as tech savvy. But Samir, we can give examples of people who were less tech savvy. They tell us that way up front, and you can tell they're making an effort to do their best to follow the directions the best they can. They're asking for help.
And to me, those are the best, not only applicants, but turns out at the end to be the best tenants that we have, are the ones that, like Monica mentioned, could be transparent. They're not the best tech savvy, may need a little bit more accommodations, but still want to follow the rules. Acknowledge that there's a little bit of an obstacle there. And again, when it comes to them being a tenant, it translates that to submitting maintenance requests, reaching out to us in contact and how we prefer it and things like that. But overall, I've noticed the ones that follow directions wind up being some of my favorite tenants, like those you put the star next to. And then the ones that, was a little bit more teeth pulling. Not saying it wasn't selected, but, it could be a little difficult at times.
Yeah, it's just like our spidey senses kind of go up like, okay, is this person going to be a headache? So going on to our second criteria, it's a strong rental history. So a lot of these criteria I just mentioned, they're pretty much, you can objectively say someone's meeting them or not. Rental history, how long have they had a lease in their own name? How long have they stayed at a home or apartment? How often have they paid on time, or do they have a history or track record of being late? Is that a regular thing? So these are all things that, one thing that we'll try to understand is in the application of what is their rent history, and assessing, is it strong or is it light?
Just to kind of follow up on that too, like some ways to really dig into someone's rental history, because obviously, like Veronica mentioned earlier, you interview them, you talk to them, they're gonna say, oh no, I was never late. I've been here for, a year, but the house is being sold, or there's repairs that has to get done that's not getting done. Like obviously tenants can give you whatever you need to hear to make them sound appealing. However, one key factor to also look into it, and I'll just follow up and we'll kind of touch upon this a little bit later, is if they list their previous landlord for you to connect with. Like a landlord reference is always great to use that as a tool to look into their rental history. Like again, when they fill out their application, look for how long they stayed at a certain property, or how often do they move around, or if they list that they was evicted, that's definitely a red flag. You want to follow up on. But if tenants or applicants, who tend to have really good rental history, have no problem providing you with the information needed to help you look in and verify that. And like Veronica mentioned, even if people are late, we know life happens, but how common does it happen for this person? Or if they're late, how many days are they late? Like, are they late just 5, or, the 3 to 5 day threshold? Are they late a whole month and trying to play catch up? Like, things like that are some little points you want to look into as you're evaluating someone's rental history when you look at these applications.
Another point, as we're evaluating the rental history, it's the rental history of a person's name on the lease. So we have seen some circumstances where people are kind of having a multi-generational family living together, and you'll want to ask, what is their individual responsibility? It's easier if their name is on the lease, but even if their name isn't, how much of the rented amount are they paying every month? How are they interacting with the landlord? Are they just living there and kind of just taking up space and not contributing anything? Or are they a meaningful part of the household? So that all kind of goes into the person's rental history.
Yeah, and again, very important when you see multiple households come together. And you'll see that as well. Like, you'll have maybe the mom that stayed in a rental, that was in an apartment for 6 years, and then the daughter was in an apartment for 2 years, and them coming together with their rental histories was individually, or what it was, like Veronica mentioned, did they stay somewhere else and was just space, just someone there? Or did they really kind of take the lead on making sure that the property was taken care of, bills were being paid, utilities were in their name, things like that?
So now, obviously, younger folks are at a little disadvantage on rental history if they just haven't had enough life to be living on their own. But there's things that they could do in terms of, contributing to the household, like you said, having a, somewhat informal, formal relationship with the parent to have some sort of regular contribution. All those things kind of help with telling the story about, how they will be as a future tenant. But that, as far as a score, a rental history, someone who's been 2+ years in the same place, paying similar rent to what they're applying for, those are generally the safer bets as far as that tenant screening criteria. So kind of segueing, and Samira, you did allude to the landlord. So part of the landlord may be one of the most important references an applicant will put down. It's good to ask for a number of references. Somebody may put down a personal reference, an employment reference, and then hopefully they also put down a landlord reference. And what the landlord has to say is important. Now, we do know that there's kind of reading between the lines sometimes of what a landlord would say that, you kind of listen out for. And that's just kind of comes from experience of doing this process every month and the volume that we have. So there's things that we kind of listen for of just the yes, no answer, or, kind of evasive answer is definitely very telling. But I know we've had some you're usually the one on our team. Samira's generally the one who calls these references today. So I know you may have a perspective of what you like to hear from landlord or other references, or what kind of like puts your senses up.
Yeah, I mean, just as Veronica mentioned, just when I do contact these different landlords, first one is when they answer. I get so excited. I'm like, yeah, I can talk to them. But then, kind of after that, just kind of reconfirming that, they are their current landlord, or, they're the property manager that's overseeing the property, maybe not the direct owner, but, the one that manages their payments and everything. And just having, like Veronica mentioned, that conversation, sometimes read it in between a line. If someone says, like, oh, yeah, it was a great tenant, and, like, it just seemed like a very short answer, like, those, like, I don't take that too bad, but at the same time, it doesn't make me as comfortable in that moment. Like, oh, okay, like, am I going to elaborate? But the landlord that say, oh, they was a great tenant, and they can give you maybe a scenario to, or even my favorite is when they say, they're very cooperative when it comes to coordinating contractors that come through, maintenance requests, or just general communication, which could be really big for us, especially when you oversee multiple properties. The last thing you want to do is chase a tenant down and get something done. So when you hear that they're responsive to maintenance requests, when you hear that they're communicative and, kind of let you know what's going on in the property, so they're your eyes and ears. That's definitely a gold star for me. I like to put that, next to their name. Even when you ask about rental payments, that's definitely someone you want to follow up with. Like, they're the ones, they're getting paid. Are you getting paid on a regular basis on your rental income, or is it late? Is it common? How often do they communicate that to you? My favorite is when I hear that, if they are late, because again, we understand life happens. My favorite is when you hear from the landlord say, they reach out to me prior to let me know they're going to be late. Those are tenants you can work with, so put a star next to that. But also, if they say, hey, like, they was late once, it's been 2 years since they've been late, or they was late once and it's been a year or 6 months, like, things like that, I kind of get excited to hear. Again, we're very, we work with everyone. So when you hear people are late, but then those that they say, oh, like, they were late, and then they pay me 15 days later, and there was no conversation, no transparency, those are kind of alarming, only because that's a wild card. You never know what you're going to get. Like, it's one of those things where you don't know if you're going to call and they'll tell you what's going on, or if you're going to call and you're chasing them for your rental payment. Like, again, when you oversee multiple properties, the last thing you want to do is have to chase your tenant through it. So those are some of the best things I like to hear when I talk to landlord references.
No, those are good points. And then I just thought of, so back to the applicant. So what they don't write down as references is telling. Because
Mhm.
imagine, oh, I can't put my current landlord down. It's like, why can't you? Like, are they out of the country? Did you not have a good relationship with them? Are you afraid of what they may say? And so if we don't see the current landlord written as one of the references, we'll ask why, and that answer is telling. So going to number 4 is a stable work history. So, and this applies whether you're self-employed or you have a W-2. So just like, and as a property manager, any kind of person assessing credit, so they're kind of looking at the work history, and generally the standard is kind of 2 years consistently with the same job is generally a safer bet. So people who move around a lot or have gaps, generally there are weaker employment histories and at least cause for concern. And so obviously we'll get into how much they make, but just having a consistent employment along with having a consistent place to live gives you a lot of information to let you know about their ability to pay all their bills on time.
And even just to kind of piggyback off of that, as Monica mentioned, like, being at the same employment for 2 years is really good. But also keep in mind, too, for some careers, for example, that we run into, too, is also like nurses, like, LPN, CNAs. And we know in that particular field, there's a lot of different agencies, there's a lot of different avenues. They could be in a hospital, they could be, at a retirement home. But if it shows that their work history, they have been in this same career for multiple years, that's also a good sign too. Maybe their employment history changed every year because agencies may change, hospitals may change. We all know it could be stressful. But if they can show that they've consistently been working as a nurse for 10 years, that's also something to highlight as being a good work history as well.
Yeah, and I would say, and in recent years we've have seen a lot of people with side hustles, so that is a legitimate employment, especially if they're doing that consistently. If it's
Mm-hmm.
something they do once 1 or 2 months a year, that's one thing that is more like a hobby. But if it's something that they've been doing for years, you can pretty much count on they'll continue to be doing that. And so people who are now there are people who have other sources of income, which we're not necessarily going to get into on this video, and that could be valid. So that as you're looking at employment history, if they have a consistent additional source of income, such as a HUD voucher or SSI. Those are all things that you would look at on the bigger picture of consistent sources of income. But the thing is, the new sources of income are the ones, I guess, that would kind of score you lower in terms of stable. I'm broadening it from just employment to sources of income to make the point of consistency in income is important.
Mm-hmm.
And then number 5, I guess I was kind of segueing into how much income, right? Can you afford to live in the property? And this is kind of a touchy one, as rent seemed too high, is more expensive to buy a house. A lot of people are kind of stretching what has been the standard of 3 times monthly rent as an income. Pretty much has been the gold standard with mortgage applications and so forth. But we do understand that it is a little tougher right now in terms of, just the pace of income increases versus housing increasing. It has been a challenge, but what you do definitely want to guard against people maybe being able to pay rent on time 1 month, but then the other 11 months of the year just being a struggle situation. So I think it's like a disservice to kind of put someone in a housing situation where they're always going to be struggling to pay rent on time.
I agree. And again, we understand in this current economy, it is hard to even have those move-in fees up front to show those three
Mm.
times of rent, or like you said, that income. Keep in mind too, though, as even this is a nice tip for like private landlords too. Keep in mind when you look for three times the income, you're not looking at just one sole person's income. I mean, if they apply by themselves, then yes, look at their income. However, if a couple is applying, or multiple people are applying to get into the house, look at the total household income, and that's what we're basing it off of. So if three different people make that total household income, then it meets the requirement of three times the rent. However, as Veronica mentioned, there's people who just make it, and they've proven themselves to be very great tenants. But those that fall under that, you are at a higher chance of, unfortunately, if something happens to them tomorrow, God forbid, like a car accident. That happened to one of our tenants. A car accident happened. Obviously, that's an unexpected expense. You have to, pay to get your car fixed. You don't have a car, you don't go to work. However, it did set them back. Luckily, or fortunate for our tenant, they was able to, reset and been on time since. But for other tenants that, tend to fall below that three times the rent income threshold, tend to have to play catch up for months. And then you find yourself being behind, for months for whatever, whether it's your mortgage payment, if you have that on your rental property, or however you use that income, like you find yourself in a cycle. So although, again, we do understand and can definitely have empathy that three times the rent could be hard, but at the same time, as smaller property management company or as a private landlord, it just gives you that security that even if they fall behind, they can eventually catch up with no problems.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess the bottom line is, as the landlord, so we're talking to this video is, directed as you as a landlord, you may have a soft spot for people who say, I can do it. Like, there's plenty of people who are like, I can do it. I'm doing it already. It's like, well, you can do it, but it's tough. And you know, do you want to take on that risk? Because this is a business, right? So it's not your landlord social service. It's a business. So you're trying to evaluate or pick the person who's most likely to pay the rent you want to charge on time every month so that you can, operate your business. So with that, having that a pretty rough or, very clear marker, it just makes it very easy to apply. We generally apply that to the gross rent because we know especially between like a self-employed and a W-2 person, depending on your deductions, what type of benefits you have, it's hard to do apples to apples if you kind of look at the net. But at the gross, it's very objective. Does the household make three times rent? If no, we just think of it for most of the time, it's just too much of a risk.
And even with just want to look at the self-employed, even if like obviously they don't have like the paycheck, they're not like those W-4 employees. Look at their W-2s. If they've been doing this for over a year or two, it will show you that total year income, and look at that as three times the rent when you do the calculations. Another video, but also to those that may be in transition, like you're looking at a job and it's like, oh, I'm a nurse, I've been at this account, but I'm going to another agency account. If they can also show you that they have a significant savings in their bank account, minus the move-in fees, they're also pretty good at, will make a qualified tenant for you to making sure that you get your rent on time, or if they fall behind, catch up pretty quickly. Because they've already shown that they could live the lifestyle they already want and be able to save money at the same time. So just a few documents to look out for as you're trying to verify if they ensure have that three times the month income.
Mhm. Yeah, so those are our five, I guess, top screening, a common one. So a bonus six that is pretty well known, but we just want to give some color in terms of how you'd apply it. Criminal history. So
Mm-hmm.
we went over that one last. Sometimes that's kind of like the biggest concern people have behind can they afford it? are they quote unquote decent people to put in the house, and judging by, criminal activity, because most landlords don't want criminal activity going on in their unit, so it's a risk. So the guidelines that we follow and what kind of has been recommended by property managers across the country are um, under or more than 3 years on any misdemeanor and more than 7 years on any felony. So basically, you're guarding against recent criminal activity, and this criteria gives room or gives another chance for people who have kind of had stuff in the past, but now they're kind of living a different life. And so I also think beyond having the flexibility or openness as a criteria, I think there are some legal pressures on, are people discriminating against people who've had past legal troubles and then making it continuous for the rest of their life, tough to find housing. So that is something that's kind of in discussion in the Philadelphia area around how to evaluate past criminal activity or history.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. I mean, with this one, as Veronica mentioned, we definitely just kind of follow the standard guidelines that's been provided to us and that's been taught to us as a property management company. 3 years for misdemeanors, 7 years for felonies. Sometimes if you're comfortable, you can kind of give me an insight of what happened, not going to detail. But other times too, for the most part, I just recommend always being very objective to it. If their background check come back and it's something that took place 10 years ago, kind of look at it as a clean slate and evaluate everything else.
Right. And it goes back to the references.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I guess in closing of these criteria, you want to apply them all consistently to kind of stay on top of, being on the right side of fair housing policies and not discriminate. And you want to put things in writing and document them for yourself. If you're having a professional property manager or a realtor help, and if you're managing it on your own, but you have a realtor helping you screen or market for the property, you'll want to make sure that they understand what your criteria is and put it in writing to the applicants, because a lot of times there's miscommunication because people are applying for things that they never will be qualified for. And it's important to kind of let people know up front so they're not wasting time with fees when they're never going to meet the criteria that was set. Before I wrap up, I do want to bring up the point that it could be illegal to use sources of income as a criteria for screening tenants. So there have been some newer local ordinances passed, such as in Philadelphia, which would deem it discrimination if you were to say that you don't want to rent to a family that has a Section 8 voucher, for instance. Confirm if there's a local ordinance on the books or if there's a local ordinance in flight or in discussions before you kind of set up your screening criteria for your rental property. Now, if you want more information about renting to Section 8 tenants, you'll want to look at the video this is appearing on the screen now. Also, stay tuned for the second part of this interview or discussion I had on criteria overall. And as always, thanks for watching. Happy investing.